Previously in Uncommon, Book 1 in the Chronicles of the Common series, Eva, Izzy, Lucian, and Kai were attacked by the escort guards attempting to retrieve the women. And now, Chapter 11, Eva. "You shot me?" I gritted my teeth and glared at Izzy, trying not to burst into tears in front of the strange men, one of whom I was currently lying atop. "Us. She shot us. And by the looks of it, the blast only grazed you," said the man beneath me. He twisted my arm painfully to get a better look at the wound. The blast just skimmed my bicep, leaving behind a bloody mess that felt as if my entire arm was on fire. He shifted beneath me and flinched. Chessboy's wound, on the other hand, was more severe, with the whole of his right shoulder charred and bleeding from a large blast mark. The stench of burning flesh roiled my stomach, and I swallowed down the rising bile. I glared at Izzy again. "You shot us. I don't think it says anything in the Guardian Handbook about shooting your charge." "Sorry," she said around the thumb she had wedged nervously between her teeth. "Sorry?" the dark man beneath me shouted. It was my turn to flinch. The impact of his anger pierced my eardrums. "Shut up, you deserved that," Izzy scolded, then turned to me with sad, apologetic eyes. "In my defense, I was aiming at Kai and you got in the way. I knew you could heal him," she said with a shrug. "Can I heal myself?" I asked curiously. "Most likely not," grumbled the tall mountain of a man hovering a few feet away. It was a little difficult to tell from all of the hair covering his face, but it looked like he was ready to murder the entire lot of us. Then again, he did just kill half a dozen guards, so maybe that was his normal post-homicide expression. "Kai, teleport them to Geminus." The man beneath me nodded, then wrapped his good arm around my waist. I closed my eyes, expecting my molecules to be torn apart and reassembled like a science fiction transporter beam. After a few seconds of feeling absolutely nothing, I peeked open an eye. Kai was frowning and squeezing his eyes closed in desperate concentration. "Performance anxiety?" I teased dryly. His eyes flew open, and his mouth opened and closed in an amusing expression resembling a dumbstruck fish. Izzy burst into a fit of giggles. "It wouldn't be the first time," she said with a snort. Kai's head spun to glare at Izzy. "You promised never to mention that." Izzy shrugged and stuck out her tongue. "Problem?" the hairy man growled. "I'm drained," Kai replied sheepishly. "Between the fight and the blood loss, I can't teleport." "Didn't you feed a Geminus?" The tall man, whom I believed was named Luke, stomped to our side and hovered over us menacingly. "I assume you're referring to the tempting live buffet you arranged to keep me distracted?" Kai asked with a sneer. "No. I paused on that offer. I had better things to do than sit in a drugged stupor in the bowels of Geminus." "The women weren't drugged," Luke growled. "And now we're stuck here with two of us wounded." "We'll walk out the old-fashioned way," Kai calmly responded, then turned to me. "I wouldn't normally complain over a beautiful woman on top of me, but can you get off? This hurts." I pushed up with my good arm, folding my aching limb into my side, and straddled the man, trying to figure out how to stand without face-planting into him. Wait, Izzy said with a groan. She dragged her feet as she approached us, then knelt down by my side. "I would love to watch him suffer a while longer, but you should probably heal him. Such sacrifices I'm forced to make," she said, grabbing my good wrist and aggressively slamming it onto Kai's wound. Kai grunted and glared at Izzy. "Was that necessary?" "Yep," Izzy smiled innocently. Without thought or my previous chants and pleas for healing, my hand began to glow white, and once again I lost feeling in the appendage. This time the healing seemed to know exactly what to do, and before long my hand returned to its perfectly normal state. I lifted my bloody palm to reveal the man's smooth porcelain shoulder. "Thank you," Kai mumbled, still glaring at Izzy. I nodded my reply and shoved against Izzy's shoulder to stand, leaving a smeared bloody print on her cloak. Though I was a little disappointed in my petty display, It was also immensely gratifying to accidentally tug on her hair and shove her onto her ass as I got to my feet. She did shoot me, after all. It may not have been intentional, but it also wasn't something I was going to forget anytime soon, especially with my pulse beating like an enraged dinosaur stampeding through my slightly smoking limb. I stumbled back into a wall of flesh and strong hands gripped my hips to still me. I looked over my shoulder to see what I presumed was a bearded frown cross Luke's obscured face. He walked over to the nearest corpse and pulled a belt from the dead man's waist. Returning to my side in 2 long strides, he gently wrapped my arm in a makeshift sling. As Luke concentrated on adjusting the sling, I noticed his brow furrow in a way that seemed oddly familiar. His teal eyes tugged at a memory I couldn't quite place. It was unfathomable how this man could be familiar at all. Between his unnatural height and size, combined with waist-length hair and a Viking beard tied up in dozens of braids, he was someone you couldn't exactly forget. No, I definitely had never met this man before, but for some reason it felt like I should know him. Luke eventually lifted his eyes to mine and paused. He searched my face, almost as if he were expecting something. Barely visible lips tugged into a tight smile. Then he stepped back and held out my discarded blaster. I took the weapon with my good hand, grateful I was still able to defend myself, because goodness knows Izzy couldn't be relied upon to do it. "Did you leave anyone alive?" Kai asked, kneeling over one of the dead guards. "No," Luke stated. "Creho, we could have questioned them to see if Kerr's here," Kai complained. "Or why they wanted Izzy and I added. "Who's Kerr, and what does Creho mean?" "Kerr is their big bad villain," Izzy said, bouncing on the balls of her feet. "He's done bad things to them throughout the years. Oh, and Creho can be loosely translated to shit." "Thanks. And who are all these guys?" I asked, waving my blaster around the clearing. Luke snatched my hand and swiftly set the blaster's safety. "These were Synergist guards," he said. "Yeah, that means nothing to me," I mumbled. Luke's teal eyes gazed at me as if I had 2 heads. Izzy patted the shoulder to my injured arm and I gritted my teeth against the pain. "She's new," Izzy said with a grin and an eye roll. "Synergist is a corporation who does business with all of the systems in the Common. Some good, some bad, some very, very bad. Don't trust them. First, remove your hand before I shoot you," I said, pointing my blaster at her hand and gritting my teeth. "Second, why did they want us?" Izzy shrugged noncommittally, but thankfully removed her hand from my wounded shoulder. "We need to leave, quickly," Luke announced. "The authorities will be here to check on the fire. We don't want to be in this terminal when they do." Slipping the blaster over my waistband, I went to retrieve my pack. I lifted the bag to pull onto my back when Luke took it from my fingers and hitched it over a shoulder. "Thanks," I said, refusing to meet his unnerving eyes. "Excuse me, but I need a moment with the trigger-happy clone." I snatched Izzy's arm and dragged her a few feet away. "Can we trust these guys?" I whispered. "You do know they can hear every word you're saying, right?" Izzy whispered back with a giggle. "Luke's a Keddy. His ears and nose are better than any other species in the Common." "Of course they can. I'm never going to get used to this shit," I mumbled, glancing at the supposed shifter. "So, can we trust them?" "Definitely," Izzy chirped happily. "If I had known they were alive," she shouted across the clearing with a sneer, "I would have planned to portal to them. Well, I suppose technically I did anyway. They own Club Geminis, the place we were headed." I pulled back in astonishment to look at the woman who thought this was all just a typical day in the park. How could she not see the bizarre twist of fate? "Let me get this straight," I said, holding up my free hand for patience. "The people we were trying to find, which also happened to be Chessboy and his friend—" "Brother?" Izzy interrupted. My head swung to the oddly unmatched siblings in confusion. "Brothers by marriage," Izzy giggled. I shook my head. "Fine. The alternate reality Winchester brothers we were looking for spontaneously happened to show up after we portal here? You don't find that odd?" Izzy twisted her lips and furrowed her brow in thought. "The witch Agby sent us here," Luke announced loudly. "I suspect her intent was for us to find the two of you." Izzy shrugged and nodded emphatically. "That explains everything." Then she spun on her heel and skipped past the brothers, heading down the path without a care in the world. "Right," I mumbled. "Perfectly normal. A strange witch knew we were coming and tossed the exact men we were looking for into our laps. Of course the insane clone wouldn't think that's weird at all." I continued my grumbling as I walked past the shifter mountain of hair, who was watching me a little too closely. I had the incredibly bratty urge to tug on his hair as I walked past, but considering our size difference, I wasn't quite ready to risk death at the hands of the strange man who had single-handedly rescued our butts from whoever those guards were. Instead, I kept my hands to myself and followed the others out of the clearing. Our new foursome continued down the path with Kai leading the way and Luke taking up the rear. The hound abandoned his meal of barbecued guard remains to happily join our procession at my side. Although the wound on the animal's shoulder didn't appear to hamper his movement, I felt rather guilty he was shot trying to protect us. I forced our group to briefly stop so I could heal the injury and was rewarded with a thick tongue across my face. "Gross!" I wiped the bloody saliva from my cheek, trying not to gag at the thought of where the hound's mouth had just been. Standing to resume our trek, I noticed the men observing the hound and me as if we were two extinct prehistoric creatures sitting inside an exotic zoo exhibit. "What?" I asked, feeling a little defensive at being the subject of such intense attention. "How are you doing that?" Kai asked, observing me like a specimen under a microscope. Izzy issued her despised ally a look of extreme shade and rolled her eyes. "Because she's totally awesome, like duh." "Profuse praise is not going to heal my gunshot wound, Valley Clone. You know, the one you gave me?" I asked bitterly, waving the blaster in my good hand to shoo Izzy back along the path. "We don't know why I can touch him. It seems to be a quirk of mine." Luke quietly mumbled something behind me, drawing my attention. I looked back just in time to see him eye me up and down. That damned hair of his made it nearly impossible to read if it was the kind of look a guy gives a girl he finds attractive, or the look of a predator sizing up the nearest threat. Considering the hellhound was once again growling in his direction, I was more inclined to believe it was the latter. I placed a hand on the hound's head to calm him as we made our way down the never-ending path of dead forest. This place was everything I never expected from a space station. From the wicked-looking hellscape to the crazy creatures, everything seemed to be at odds with what my mind believed should be inside a station floating in space. It was so disorienting that I could swear the path we were walking was the exact same spot we had been 2 hours ago. Izzy?" I whispered to my skipping companion. "Are we lost?" "Nope," she replied with glee. "Are you certain? Because that tree looks awfully familiar." "The terminal is spelled with magic," she said, with sparkling eyes and a wide smile. "Cool, huh? The path can go on forever or dump you into the gauntlet in a matter of minutes. We'll get there when we get there." I groaned and hitched my arm into a more comfortable position. "Are you telling me we could be stuck here for the rest of our lives? You might have told me that when we were planning our escape through the portal." "Speaking of portals," Kai spun around to face Izzy. "Why are you here, and how did you escape?" Izzy turned her nose up and refused to look at Kai. "Would someone please tell the asshat that I refuse to speak with him?" I suppressed a grin. Izzy's grudge against the man who had been her first clone crush was a long way from over. From the looks of Kai's tense jaw and closed eyes, he was equally frustrated. It was easy to see why Izzy was attracted to Kai. He had a thick head of shoulder-length raven curls, tousled as if he had just risen from bed. His strong brow and piercing dark eyes gave him the appearance of a true bad boy. His closely trimmed goatee and mustache framed a mouth that would be entirely kissable if it weren't permanently molded into a frown. He appeared to have a strong muscular build beneath the cliché head-to-toe black leather attire. Kai was playing up that sexy bad boy vibe to the fullest. I rolled my eyes, realizing Izzy had fallen for the quintessential vampire romance hero. My musings on our supernatural new companion were abruptly cut off when Luke stepped in front of me. He lifted a single brow and pointedly glanced between Kai and myself. "Oops, ogle much, Eva?" I blushed and quickly looked away from the group, studiously toying with the hound's twisted ears. Luke sighed and turned to face Izzy. "How did you get here, and why?" he asked, the low growl in his voice nearly vibrating my own chest. Izzy's face bloomed into a huge smile. She bounced on her feet and threw her arms around the giant of a man. "Oh, Lucian, it's so good to finally meet you!" She pulled back and her lips turned upside down. "Although, just between you and me, you might want to consider a trim. This whole hairy thing you've got going really doesn't suit you. Remember the mission to Naraki 33, where you rescued that group of Hada from those skin traders? Now that was a sexy look. Do that again." Luke carefully pushed Izzy away and exhaled a deep breath. "Answer." "You always were a grumpy boy," Izzy said with a pout. "Fine, but it's a long story. We better keep skipping." "Walk," Luke said, motioning for us to proceed. Izzy commenced with our tale, beginning with the inception of her little alien rebellion. The woman definitely knew how to tell a good yarn, leaving no detail missed. I suspected she was drawing out the story to annoy Kai, who impatiently huffed and groaned throughout the multi-hour telling of our adventures. At some point around her mysterious vision of my life, I began to tune her out. My arm was killing me, and the strange creatures peeking out from the bushes were giving me the creeps. The hound at my side danced on anxious feet, eager to give chase, but also conflicted by his new obsession with protecting me. The hound was a curious addition to our little group. I wondered how far the animal's loyalty would extend. Would he follow us all the way to the Hada camps? Was he my familiar the same way Izzy seemed to think the tiny bat was hers? I couldn't seem to communicate with him in the same manner Izzy did with her bat, so I doubted as much. Though I wasn't entirely convinced Izzy was actually conversing with her tiny bat. I wouldn't be surprised in the least if she was making it all up to keep her little pet. I rubbed my eyes, trying to clear the sting from the distant fire. The air still smelled of sulfur, but the farther we walked from the clearing, the smoke from the burning tree vanished and the falling ash slowed to a trickle. Despite the deceptive terrain, we were obviously going somewhere, but I had to admit that the thought of magic being used to manipulate the terminal was a little mind-blowing. Magic! I used magic to heal 3 people. No, not people, Eva. 3 supernatural beings. I was still having trouble processing the fact that I wasn't entirely human. The proof was undeniable. What human could possess a hand that glows white and heals with just a touch? But was I really a witch? I snorted in disbelief. Aside from my missing 5 days in the White Room, I had no idea how long it had been since I crashed into the snowplow on Earth, but it felt like only a mere day had passed. In such little time, so much had happened that I wondered if the use of magic was truly so astonishing. I supposed when faced with vampires, shifters, aliens, and hellhounds, a little magic wasn't so difficult to believe. The fact that I was the one using the magic, or rather the magic seemed to be using me, was exceedingly difficult to believe. I absently wondered what else I could do, and realized I had no idea what witches, or matri, were capable of doing. Did they chant to the 4 corners and dance in the moonlight on certain days of the year? Would I have to sacrifice chickens and draw pentagrams and salt? Suddenly the thought of being a witch wasn't so appealing. I have nothing against crystals and billowing skirts, but they were the furthest thing from my style as could be. I much preferred a pair of well-worn jeans, a t-shirt, and a comfortable pair of combat boots. Don't get me wrong, I like a little style, but comfort beats style any day of the week. More troubling was the thought of having to become part of a coven. Did they even do that? As all of my former bosses can attest, I'm not really a joiner. A good cause was fun every now and again, but I had difficulty committing to a gym membership, hence my out-of-breath struggle to keep up on our trek through space hell. When it came to Izzy's mission to saving the Hada, I didn't have much of a choice. It was either follow along or, well, Death wasn't much of a second option. What I needed was a safe place to lay low for a little while and find my footing in this new universe. My sheltered existence on Earth put me behind the curve in regards to common knowledge. Ignorance is never a valid excuse. I was quickly coming to realize that out here, being naive and uneducated could mean the difference between life and death. But how does one learn a lifetime worth of knowledge in record time? It was doubtful I would stumble upon a Common for Dummies manual. I looked to my little bouncing friend, waving her arms with animation as she described our run from the Vatas guards and mad dash to the portal. Maybe she was my guardian after all. The universe wouldn't be so cruel as to drop me through a portal with no help at all. Would it? I snorted again. Yes, it would. With my luck, whatever deities existed would probably find great pleasure in saddling me with a half-mad guide, not to mention a vampire and a shifter who seemed less than pleased to be our new chaperones. All we needed now was a maniacal enemy mastermind determined to see us all dead. For all I knew, we had already collected our nefarious enemy in the Vatas, or those strange guards from the Synergist Corporation, or even the guy who Kai seemed to be hunting. With my luck, it was all three. Izzy finally finished her long and sordid story, leaving a wake of silence in the terminal. It even seemed the creatures hiding in the bushes retreated to ponder her tale. Everything suddenly was far too calm. "Are you really from Earth?" Luke's deep voice startled me. I rubbed my sweating palms on my thigh. "Yeah, apparently I can't go back." "When you came to the Common, it was on the 14th?" Luke asked. Yeah," I absently said, searching over my shoulder for whatever was giving me the paranoid feeling that we were being watched. I was hit by a snowplow on Earth and crashed into Izzy's back cave in Vatas whatever its name is. Luke's eyes narrowed on the back of his brother's head, then he appeared to be lost in thought. I was about to return to my scanning of the forest, certain an attack was imminent, when the hound stepped in my path, pushing against my legs in a signal for me to stop. A deep growl vibrated up my legs a moment before two guards in red uniforms stepped through the bushes. "Not again," I whined. This time, instead of pulling blasters, Luke and Kai lifted their hands in compliance. "Okay, it looks like we aren't fighting our way out of this one." The hound stepped in front of me protectively, growling wildly at the guards. Drool dripped from his fangs and his fur spiked in warning. I placed a hand on his shoulder, hoping to calm him. I wasn't about to see the poor creature get shot again out of sense of loyalty to me. The two guards dropped their jaws in shock. With wide eyes, they looked at each other, then back at me. If I weren't in serious pain and at my wit's end, I would have definitely played up this talent. Yeah, I can touch a hellhound. Can we all get over that now?" I asked impatiently. One of the guards cleared his throat, opening his mouth and closing it again, and swallowed. "Ma'am, if you're controlling that Clued, would you mind asking him to stand down? We're not here to hurt you," the braver guard requested. "We're the King's Guard. He's requested your presence. We've been ordered to safely escort you to him." "Oh, he's sexy. Can we go, Eva? Can we? I want to go see the king," Izzy said, clapping her hands and wiggling her hips. "This will be so much fun." "King?" I asked. Kai and Luke both groaned. Vol. Once again, I was locked in a damned white room. True to their word, the guards kindly escorted our entourage, hellhound and all, through a side exit from the Hell Forest and into the King's Terminal. After that, things got a little dicey. Once we were surrounded by the King's Guards, they insisted I be taken for medical treatment while the rest of our group wait in a holding area, which I was fairly certain was the universal phrase for prison. Luke and Izzy put up a fight over the splitting up of our group, while Kai lounged against a wall inspecting his nails and making it plainly obvious the man could care less. The little skirmish and argument was swiftly put to rest when my faithful hellhound intervened, growling and snarling at the threatening guards. Unfortunately, the Clued also proved the guard's point that I would be well protected. So our little group had our weapons and bags confiscated. Then my loyal hell puppy and I were marched into a sterile white medical bay and promptly locked inside. While I'm sure my wait for medical attention was still clocking at less than an hour, the services so far were ranking right up there with an understaffed inner-city urgent care facility. My arm ached to the bone, but at least the wound was charred enough to not have me bleeding all over the place. Not that I considered that a truly positive sign. I knew my clothes were singed to the wound. I could feel them tug at the edges of the injury every time I flinched, which was roughly every other second. I've heard the tales of burn victims and was not looking forward to the future hours of abrading. I was definitely in for long nights of pain and a scar that would make the most hardened daredevils cringe. The hound paced in front of a long mirrored wall, clearly unhappy with our prison. Every now and again he would pause and sniff, then let out a growl, leading me to believe there were likely spectators behind that wall. It was troubling, though not entirely unexpected, to realize I was more specimen than patient. Honestly, couldn't they have conducted their observation after my first treatment? I had half a mind to dig through the wall of cabinets and administer my own triage. The room wasn't entirely unpleasant. Aside from the observation mirror, it looked like any other hospital room. Sterile white walls lined with white cabinets and even more white counters. A cold metal table in the center of the room completed these simple amenities. There didn't appear to be a sink or hazardous waste bin, though there were several objects on the counters that I couldn't identify. I hopped off the table and approached the observation mirror only to have the hound push against my legs and shove me back a step. "Yep, there are definitely people watching us." "It's all right," I cooed to the animal, rubbing his ears to calm him. "They're probably scared of you. Why don't you go lie down in the corner?" The Clued dropped his head and rubbed his snout against my leg affectionately, or maybe to mark his territory. I walked over to the corner and patted the cold white floor. "Come here, be a good doggy and lie down." The hound snuffed and tossed his head in a tantrum, but slowly came to my side and dropped his haunches. I scratched behind his ears and gave his neck a gentle pat. "I know, boy, I'm getting a definite evil scientist vibe from this place, too." Standing from my crouch, I eyed the mirror suspiciously. I walked to the center of the observation wall and crossed my good arm over my chest. Plastering the most exasperated expression I could muster over my face, I waited. And waited some more. I was hoping my disdain would either elicit a booming voice from a loudspeaker or even a doctor to finally come through the door. Neither happened. After what felt like a good 5 minutes, I tried another tactic. In the hopes of putting whoever was watching at ease, I opted for a quick friendly wave. "Hello. Yes, I know it's a shock that I can touch a Clued. I'm odd. What's a girl to do?" I shrugged, then winced at the movement. "Look, you're the ones who insisted I get medical treatment, so might there be actual treatment in this medical facility? Maybe an aspirin. I'm not picky. I'll take generic if you got it." The door to the side of the mirror slid open. A rather tall man and average-height woman cautiously walked into my room. Both had black hair and completely black eyes. While the woman could pass as human, the man most definitely could not. His skin was slightly red. Not quite pink, but it appeared as if the red was contained just beneath the surface. He had a ring of bumps along the crown of his head and 2 short horns protruding from just above either ear. Holy demon spawn. I froze in place, afraid to move a muscle or even breathe too heavily. Come to think of it, I wasn't breathing at all. "We're here to treat your injury," the woman said with a clipped, unidentifiable accent. I let out the breath I'd been holding and cautiously moved to the metal table. Ascending the small set of steps next to the table, I sat down, refusing to vulnerably lie back because, hello, demons! The risk of alien probes was one thing, but demon spawn were a fright far more threatening. I wanted my hellhound in sight and easy access to jump from the table at any moment. The doctors, presuming that's what they were, made a wide circuit of the room, steering as far away from the hellhound as the small room allowed. They collected various canisters and strange tools, then laid them out on the table beside me. The woman then added a bundle of red fabric to the table that I hadn't previously noticed her carrying, a fact that wasn't terribly surprising when faced with my first demon, but the lack of complete awareness to my surroundings sent a shot of adrenaline through my system. "This is not the time to lose it, Eva. You're on your own here. Keep it together." I shook off my shock and concentrated on what the demon doctors were doing. The woman came to stand in front of me and grabbed a small canister. She moved toward my arm, and I flinched back, throwing out a hand to stop her. "What is that?" I asked. Her face twisted into a shocked expression I was quickly becoming familiar with. The one that says, "Are you really that stupid?" "I want you to tell me everything you are going to do before you do it," I demanded. The woman looked to her companion, who paused in preparing another canister. They both stared at each other in confusion, then quickly nodded their compliance. "This is a solution to soften the blast wound so we can remove your clothing," the woman advised. I nodded for her to proceed, and she liberally sprayed my arm with the solution. The thick mist was cool and soothing, and if I wasn't mistaken, it definitely included some element of pain relief. I sighed a deep breath for the first time in hours. "You can take off your clothes now," she said. My eyes quickly went to the red man with horns who was fidgeting with his instruments and decided full naked was definitely not on the agenda. I pulled off my cloak and tossed it aside, then gripped the torn fabric of my sleeve and ripped it off my arm. "That's the best you're going to get," I announced, proud of my modest solution. The woman's lips thinned and her fists clenched. She clearly wasn't accustomed to disobedient patients. From the corner of the room, my hound growled in warning, and I smiled pleasantly at the demon doctors. Good doggy. I definitely needed to find that animal some dog treats, preferably not of the dead and barbecued guard variety. She startled and took a step away from the animal, wisely realizing she wasn't going to win this battle. The woman held her hand out for another canister, which the tall demon handed to her. "This is flesh fixed," she said, her accent even more clipped and pronounced than before. "I need to press it to your skin to prime the formula, then spray it over the wound." "Proceed," I said with a touch of regal authority. She pressed the canister to the side of my neck, and I felt a quick pinch. The woman then turned the canister over and began to spray my arm. After a single pass, the charred skin began to slough off my arm and drop to the table. I felt nothing but a small itch. With another 2 passes of the spray, new skin began to form on my arm, and the itch intensified. By the 4th pass, my skin was completely back to normal. No abrading, no months of healing torture, and not a single scar. Holy hell, demon medicine kicks ass! I reached out to scratch the new skin, but the demon man snatched my hand and his fingers firmly curled around my arm. "Do not touch new skin," he said, his accent interspersed with clicks and pops that made him nearly unintelligible. Struck mute with fear, I nodded and tugged at my limbs shackled in his grip. He abruptly released me, and I hurriedly jumped from the table, scurrying over to the safety of my hound. "Okay, thanks for patching me up, but I have places to go and people to see. Can someone show me to my friends?" I asked nervously. The woman spun around with yet another silver tube in her hand. "We're not done." "Sure we are," I said, smacking my freshly healed arm, causing the demon man to flinch. "Good as new, so let's move this tour along." The 2 doctors looked at each other with a frown, then the woman turned back to me. By the firm set of her lips, I could tell this time she was determined to win. "I need to—" She paused, nibbling on her lip nervously. "I need to give you blood boost to prevent infection." Goodness, this woman's boss must be seriously high maintenance. It was plain to see she was more afraid of failing to do her job than complying with a difficult patient. "Fine, fine," I said, holding out my arm to her. She cautiously approached me, keeping a watchful eye on the clue, and pressed the end of the tube to my inner arm. She held it there for a few seconds, then scuttled back to the safety of the table across the room. The man held up the bundle of red fabric. "Must change, then go to friends." My shoulders dropped in defeat. Couldn't they just let me go? Did they really need to inoculate and dress me as well? God save me from helpful demons. "We'll wait outside for you," the woman said, shoving the tall red demon toward the door. "Press the blue button next to the hatch when you're ready." The demon couple left me alone with my clue and the rather large observation mirror. There was no way I was getting naked in front of an audience, even if I couldn't see them. I snatched the red fabric from the table and pushed into the corner by the door, hoping the angle would obscure the view from my peeping toms. After discarding the remains of my damaged blouse, I rolled down the top of my gray Vatis jumpsuit and slipped on the tight red short-sleeved shirt I found among the pile of fabric. The fit was skin-tight, but at least it covered my full torso. The same could not be said for my breasts. The neck scooped dangerously low, exposing the edge of my black bra and giving a generous view of my cleavage. After dropping my witch's skirt to the glossy floor, I pulled off the jumpsuit and shook out the rest of the fabric, which appeared to be a long skirt. "You have got to be kidding me," I whined. Without another option, I reluctantly pulled on the sad excuse for a skirt. The garment, which was a generous description, consisted of 2 short panels of solid fabric that barely reached mid-thigh, and was held around my waist by a string. 2 nearly floor-length transparent panels of fabric overlaid the skirt, serving absolutely no purpose at all. The front and back panels left a 2-inch gap all the way up to my waist and barely covered my ass. Just my luck, the day I left Earth I happened to be wearing a thong, so my bare cheeks were hanging in the wind. To make matters worse, gold beads and coins dangled from the strings at my hip, jingling and chiming with my every move. Great, I looked like a damned supernatural harem girl. Subscribe to continue listening and discover what the Demon King of Atlanta has in store for our merry band of heroes. If you liked what you heard, the Uncommon ebook can be purchased at all major retailers for only 99 cents. Thank you for listening.